Good morning, everyone. We welcome you this morning to our Bible study on this frosty morning in the Northeast. Today is Saturday, February 2nd, 2019. We are recording from the Plainfield Christian Science Church Independent, Plainfield, New Jersey. And we're so glad that you could join us. And this morning, our moderator is Shukra from Maryland.
Good morning. Okay, we would like to start off this morning with the reading from Miscellaneous Writings. Shaidat?
I'm here.
Please, will you read this?
Absolutely. Humility is lens and prism to the understanding of mind healing. It must be had to understand our textbook. It is indispensable to personal growth and points out the chart of his divine principle and rule of practice. Cherish humility. Watch and pray without ceasing, or you will miss the way of truth and love. Humility is no busybody. It has no moments for trafficking in other people's business. No place for envy, no time for idle words, vain amusements, and all the etc. of the ways and means of personal sense. Let Christian scientists minister to the sick. Let them seek the lost sheep who, having strayed from the true fold, have lost their great shepherd and yearn to find living pastures and rest beside still waters. These long for the Christ-likeness that is above the present status of religion and beyond the walks of common life, quite on the verge of heaven. This is from The Way and Miscellaneous Writings by Mary Baker Eddy, pages 356 and 357.
Thank you. Our topic for today is clothed with humility, and it's focused primarily on the readings from 1 Peter 5 and with references into Psalms 23. And the first question is, what does shepherd mean?
Hello.
Yes.
May I read something? I Googled it. I put in the Good Shepherd, and this is what I found. It says the Good Shepherd is one of the thrusts of biblical scripture. The tendency of humans to put themselves into danger's way and their inability to guide and take care of themselves apart from the direct power and leading of God is also reinforced with the metaphor of sheep in need of a shepherd.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, one second. I just wanted to say something about the reading. I like what Mrs. Eddy is saying, describing the lost sheep. The lost sheep who, having strayed from the true fold, have lost their great shepherd and yearn to find living pastures and rest beside still waters. To me, that says something about the sheep. It's, this is the sheep that's yearning, therefore ready to obey. I found that significant.
Anyway, very beautiful. Thank you.
I want to add to that. I was reading, I can't remember his first name, but I believe it's Keller. He wrote the book about sheep in the 23rd Psalm. And in one part, he talks about that sheep sometimes are very envious and butt each other and quarrelsome. But he noticed that when he would come on the field, the shepherd, their eyes would turn on him and not on what was going on around them, and they would calm and stop. And I thought, what a wonderful, and she's teaching us here that if your eyes are on God, then you don't have time for all that. Excuses.
A great song.
Yeah, that's a great song. Very true.
I have also noticed that it's quite the job of those who are in the positions of teaching and stuff, that they have to deal with this among the flock. It's a constant thing. Mrs. Eddy had it, Paul had it, and I see it now, even in how It needs to be constantly guarded, and sometimes the flock needs redirecting.
Yeah, it's a mental discipline, isn't it? To keep your thought focused on what does Mrs. Eddy say? Hold thought steadfastly to the enduring, the good, true. Hold your thought steadfastly to our shepherd, as Jim likes to refer to him. Yeah, it's a mental discipline.
Yeah, and reading about sheep, I was surprised really how absolutely helpless they are. I mean, if they do stray away, they can't find their way back. They seem to have no sense of direction or smell, or, they can't protect themselves. They don't run fast. They don't attack people or anything. So I found it comforting just in times when we are feeling so terribly helpless, just like we can't even lift a finger, to know that that great shepherd is watching over us. Doesn't matter how helpless we are feeling. Just as the sheep have their shepherd, and how tenderly and carefully, as Charity was saying, they have to watch over each one.
And just as the good shepherd goes to find the lost sheep, God is always searching us. He's always there, prodding, guiding. The truth is always doing it.
I've been reading Mrs. Eddy, Christian Healer, the Amplified Version, and I notice how she's constantly telling her students to turn back to God. It's always about God. If you're ever lost, go to God first, me second.
Thank you.
I think it's a very special relationship with this shepherd and sheep thing, because obviously, from some of us, probably everybody who is here, our own experiences, we had gone astray, looking everywhere for the rest that we need. And it's amazing what's happening now, like with the website, how people are finding it. And when they have found it, they've always been searching so much. They've been yearning to find the truth. And it's like, okay, the willing shepherd who is really seeking now to come back home finds the shepherd and walks that way.
Thank you very much, yes. And that's a good way to think of our website and to include it daily in our prayers, to know those that are yearning will find it. And we're hearing from people just about every day now finding us.
Doesn't Christ say, I am the good shepherd?
Yes. Yeah. The pure Christ truth.
Where did he instruct his disciples to go when he sent them 2 by 2?
Lost sheep of the house of Israel.
Yeah.
Good point. Yeah. So we pray for those lost sheep. We'll find their way. We all did, so.
I would like to add, there's one part in that quote also where she says, strayed from the true fold. And again, going back to Keller, he talks about the different shepherds and how some do not take care of their sheep, aren't watching them closely, and then they can get hurt, lost, and run off and stampede, and it's very dangerous. And I want to make reference to this just because I keep going back to this. I know about New Age, because New Age is really leading many sheep away from the true fold. And I bring it up because it's significant, because it's mimicking Mrs. Eddy's teachings, it's calling itself the Way, and Jesus said he was the Way. And because we do Bible studies, we have to address this incorrect teaching. And I want to mention a book that Tom just found, and I don't even know if he knows how profound it is, but it's called From Hawthorne Hall, an Historical Story, 1885, by William Lyman Johnson, I guess is how you say his name. And it was written in 1922, I believe, with Longyear. And it's a record, and basically what I gather from what I've read, it's a very clear teaching on how people were misled during this time period that he's writing about in those 1800s, and how Mrs. Eddy had to deal with it. But the beauty of this book is he shows in a story, he teaches it in a story of how the wrong teaching looked and how to protect yourself from it. And I hope to share more of it as we go along. But New Age is just really a stronghold right now and needs to be addressed. And I hope anyone who's listening who hasn't read our Love is the Liberator on New Age, I believe from last year, they should read it. And I hope to share more of this book, and I think we can get it electronically, and we'll be able to share it eventually, because it's very important to understand the difference.
Thank you very much.
Good. Great.
Wonderful. And thank you, Tom. And this is, again, these inspired people feeling inspired to find these books, and books that have been lost in a way, that are now being found and are very, very significant in today's world. Because it does have a very strong hold, is a good word for it. It's quite...
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Just briefing on it is, William Johnson wrote some of the music for Mary Baker Eddy's hymns, and his father was on the first board of directors, so he was very close with everything with, Mary Baker Eddy and the history of Christian Science. And so when I looked around for this book, I found it's completely impossible to buy this anywhere unless you're buying, some of the, used copy that someone wanted to sell, But it's just not published anywhere.
I forgot to mention that. Tom has got a very good point. This young man, William Lyman Johnson, helped his dad while his dad was working very diligently for Mrs. Eddy. So he saw this firsthand as a young teenager and a young man, and he helped his family financially so his dad could give all his time in working for Mrs. Eddy and her mission.
Yeah, we have the 2 volumes, The History of the Christian Science Movement, by him, and the good one to have. It's a very, very thorough history of it. I guess I didn't realize it was... These books, too, are hard to get or hard to find, but I have a copy. I think we have copies at church. I believe Joanne in Florida typed it up and made it available to download. We'll have to check that out. Anyway, yes, it's a very thorough history of the Christian Science movement. And King Bear, this New Age, is very important right now. And thank you very much, Linda, for bringing that point up. In one of the commentaries read about what a good shepherd does, he's a watchman. Think about that, watching, foreseeing trouble, standing guard over his flock, not really ever having a time to take off or rest. I mean, always someone, his dog or something, had to be watching the flock. Again, they were so helpless that they could be easily taken down if they weren't watched. And then another was guarding and protecting. And one of the commentaries, and I thought this was very interesting, this is a quote, "We have spent too much time coaxing half-dead sheep back to life again, and not enough time in building barriers against the wolves. It's really to consider how important it is. This is why the teaching of animal magnetism is so highly important. That is building the barrier against the wolves. And if we don't do that, then people do get struck down. And it's much harder to have to coax, as he said, half-dead sheep back into the fold. Let's be earlier on in that work so they don't have to take that route. Mike, were you going to speak?
Yes. What I was going to say is, unfortunately, I'm not an expert on sheep, but the people that introduced me to Christian Science actually raised sheep. So they did give me a bunch of things that I think is very important about the nature of sheep. My little experience with them, my neighbor had some, and they kept getting loose and coming over to my place and wreaking havoc. And so I tried to hunt them up one time inside of a building. There was about 6 or 8 sheep, and the door was within 1 foot of being closed, and they all came out at one time, knocked the door off of the rail. It was a sliding door. And if they just move together, whether it's in the right direction or the wrong direction, they all move a lot of times is the flock in a whole bunch, and that goes back to what was just said about them being easily misled. So that's why one has to be vigilant. And what the sheep people told me was, and this applies to the 23rd Psalm very much, is that they don't like to drink out of flowing water. They like the water to be still waters, and lying down in the green pastures. They like peaceful places, and so what Linda was telling about from that book, I think, is so important, because that's very new to me too. And different animals just have that different nature, and what's being said here is really the nature of the sheep. And we don't want to be like them. We want to be able to really mind our shepherd and listen to him, so we aren't led astray, as they're so easily done.
Thank you, Mike. I read, too, something about, it was called a Judas sheep, and the Judas sheep were trained to lead the sheep into slaughter, and they would just follow them unquestioningly. Again, we need to know our Bible in Science and Health, so we're not led to slaughter, and help prevent others from following the Judas sheep. In this case, it's for a reason, I suppose, but it goes to what Linda was talking about, the false prophets, the false shepherds would lead those astray. Some other things this commentary said about shepherd was that he must guide. He leads, points out the way, shows how things are to be done, rather than whipping and driving. He leads sheep, talking about the shepherd.
And of course, that can only be done by example.
Yeah. Said the good shepherd can feed the flock of God only as his own soul has been fed. He must have tasted the experience that he exhorts to others to imitate, for his exhortations are weak and powerless. So, again, the necessity to be living this truth before you try to teach it or teach others. You've got to be doing it and leading, not shoving and pushing and commanding or demanding.
that was Peter's own experience. He was living it and was advising others to do the same.
Yes.
I think that is a very good way of putting it, because I, not being those sheep's shepherd, I was trying to force them into a place, and I couldn't do it. So I think and I think what I was trying to say too, and that really helped illuminate it, Mrs. Singletary, is that different animals, like different people, have different personalities, and you have to figure out how to coax them, or not coax them, but entice them to go in the right direction. Because if you try to force it, it's just not going to happen. And maybe you think you've succeeded, but in the end, things always get messier if you're trying to force animals or people or whatever into a situation that they don't want to be in.
Thank you.
Well, and that gets back to the most fundamental of all things, doesn't it?
Yes.
What is our motive? What do sheep respond to? What do people respond to?
They respond to love.
Love.
Yeah. Good shepherd loves the sheep. And the sheep feel the love. And that is why they respond to it.
This goes along with this thing that was read from Mrs. Eddy, where it says it has no moments for trafficking in other people's business. One thing to be a great example and to lead, but you can't live somebody else's life for them. You can't get into the details and manipulate, control other people in that type of way. So much better if the sheep see the love and the good example of the shepherd and know that its source is from God and want to follow because they recognize it's good, instead of being forced into something like was described earlier.
That's the absolute fundamental right there, is that if we do it with God, because it just made me think of when we got this new puppy, and I'd be forking up manure with a sharp pitchfork, the dog would come running by like crazy, and I was afraid that she'd get stuck on the pitchfork, and what do I do? So finally I thought, well, I'll just say, stay clear, and it was incredible. She came running, and I thought, stay clear, and said, stay clear, and she ran around me instead of running next to me, and the only thing I can say that was a communication for once through God that I was able to do, because the dog recognized it without any quote-unquote training. It was incredible.
That's wonderful. That's so true. We are mental beings, and what we think is communicated. Why we must be so aware of our thoughts and what we are thinking.
In the phrase, let Christian Scientists minister to the sick, let them seek the lost sheep who have been strayed from the true fold. That makes me think of Plainfield. That Plainfield is seeking the lost sheep. I was a lost.
Thank you, Fairley.
But, well, we all kind of lost sheep.
Yeah,
and the truth found us.
That's right. The truth found you. It was the good shepherd seeking you out.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes, I'm so grateful for that.
Yeah, like that beautiful song of Peter's. God found him.
When I found God, I found me.
Yeah, when I found God, well, anyway.
I just want to add with this love that the sheep are attracted to is also looks like discipline, because some of these new age, it looks like love. It's kind of, God is this and love that, find your true self, and it feels all loving, but it's lacking the principles, especially the biblical principles, which also includes the rod and boundaries and discipline and obedience. And sometimes that doesn't feel like what we have been told love is.
Thank you.
But you'll see the results of it in the long run.
Exactly.
And little children know that if you really love them, you'll make them mind and do the right thing. And they want an adult to catch them when they're not doing right and have them do the right thing.
Yeah, and they feel the safety, don't they?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And the new age doesn't have that. It's very misleading. It lets people think that they're in control of their own life and they don't need God.
Well, again, the discipline side, this other, that's why I wrote to it about truth and love, the marriage of truth and love. Kratzer wrote about it in the Bible this week, truth and mercy. They have to be combined. You can't just have one or the other. He likens it to a bird with only one wing, where you just fly around and fall. And when the divine love also expresses the principle, and the divine principle also expresses the divine love. They are intertwined together when it's divine, but when it's human, which is this New Age stuff, it's this one-sided. And that's why it's attractive to people, because the lack of real discipline. I don't know. I don't think they teach the Ten Commandments. Maybe I'm wrong, but not that I know of. Anyway, the discipline side that must be with it. And just as we talked about, if you're too principled, if you try to force everything and you want it this way and that way, and there's no love behind it, well, that fails as well. There must be this combination. And absolutely, and it's a part of science that people want to drop off or forget about, the tougher side. The fact that Jesus whipped the money changers out of the temple, the fact of how tough Mrs. Eddy was, and how tough we must be on error. They want to forget that and just say God is love, everything's wonderful. It's also, I'd say, a large part of why the organization is failing, because of that. They don't want to teach that part. They don't want to teach you how to handle animal magnetism. So the wolves will come in and eat everyone alive. It's got to be the combination, or it will fail. Because if it's not the combination, it's not divine. It is human. And human is destined to fail.
Or even to look within and look at some of the habits or the things that need to be corrected in yourself. I never, that's not brought up much.
It is not. I had never read Pond and Purpose before I met Mrs. Eddy. And, excuse me, Mrs. Evans. I feel like I've met Mrs. Eddy, too. Before I met Mrs. Evans, I wasn't familiar with prose work. And the looking within takes toughness. You cannot be kind to your errors. You can't. You just can't, because they'll eat you alive. It's why it's called aggressive mental suggestion. You've got to be equally as tough to the negative thoughts that come to you. That toughness is required. The principle is required. The discipline is required.
I think that's why Mrs. Eddy wrote that love was the principle of Jesus' life. You have to really think about that to appreciate what that really means. Divine love is principle. And if your feelings something pretends to be loving but isn't principled, that's a sure sign it's not love. And you don't want to be fooled by that imposter.
It was one thing that certainly attracted me to Mrs. Evans. I had never met a practitioner like her. All the rest of her very sweet and kind and loving, but she had this toughness and this strength that gave me such a sense of security. And only someone like her could have led us through the law case and through everything that tried to destroy us, because she had that toughness. She knew how to handle animal magnetism, and she knew how to tell it like it is when she needed to, and she wasn't afraid. And she got at times a terrible backlash, but that's where the watches come in. That's where everything that this Christian Science was not just words to us, we were having to live it. It was save, Lord, or we perish.
And it was that life she lived that caused the organization to delist her, to excommunicate our church. It was, you know, truth and error repel one another. Good and evil repel one another. And the corruption in Boston was repelled by that clear, strong thought. The rest of us were attracted to it, as are all of you.
I think the results speak to why it's been so important, because Plainfield is the only independent Christian Science church that we know of. So it had to be the way it was.
That's true.
Yep.
That's right. That's why there aren't other independent churches. Well, look what we went through, and she was a leader in all the right ways. Yes.
I'd like to comment on the what you just said. Can you hear me? This is George Abetti.
Yes.
We hear you.
Yes.
Okay. There's a really interesting phrase that ties into this whole subject we're talking about. And the phrase is God referring constantly to you're going out and coming in. And it occurs like, I don't know, maybe like 1,000 times or hundreds and hundreds of times, primarily in the Old Testament. And it's frequently related to Joshua and Caleb, who were the only two people after the desert wanderings who were allowed to come into the Promised Land. All the rest died and were replaced by a new generation. You can read about it in Numbers 14 and 15. Anyway, what's interesting about that phrase is that it's I actually preached a sermon on this many, many years ago, but it's the concept of the warrior sheep. And so when you talk about Mrs. Evans, I was that really kind of it made me think about this. But so the shepherd would lay down. Usually the sheep were in kind of a corral, which was basically a bunch of stones. They didn't have a lot of wood in those days, so most of the sheepfolds were basically like a rock wall to prevent the wolves from getting in. And the good shepherd would lay down in the doorway first to keep the sheep from getting out at night and getting slaughtered, and also to keep the wolves from getting in. So the whole idea of going out and coming in is very much of a shepherd term. But if you look at the Old Testament, it's also a term that's replete with these incredible warriors who basically fought the battle for God. And I think it's really good for us to view ourselves as warrior sheep. I mean, we're desperately dependent upon our shepherd, but we are also to be warriors. And because we're dependent on the Good Shepherd, we can be warriors, and we can speak the truth, and we can not be afraid. I've been doing some work on that recently, and so anyway, I just wanted to bring up that phrase in the Old Testament that I think is germane to this conversation.
Thank you. And we definitely do feel warriors. We do feel definitely as warriors, and if you don't, Gary likes to give that testimony. When he first came, that's not what he was expecting, but he learned we have to. And the warfare is always against the human mind. Someday we can all throw it down, but that time has not come.
Right. And Mrs. Eddy says, Christian Scientists have enlisted. So it goes hand in hand.
He speaks of warfare often.
Yeah, the warfare, right.
The warfare with oneself is grand.
That's what the watches are all about as well.
They are.
Yep.
Yeah.
Warfare.
But it goes
that the warfare with oneself is that which is not fought at all in the mainstream that I was in.
Thank you, yes.
Never looked within, no.
Right. So if you are inclined to be a Christian Scientist, you accept that you have enlisted in the army. You are on the battlefield, and you are a warrior. If you don't want to be a warrior, well, you can't be a Christian Scientist.
Okay.
It took me a long time to accept that.
I think you got to decide what you want less. Do you want less of your old life, or do you want less to be a warrior? I definitely want less of my old life.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Sword in one hand, a tool in the other.
Shall we move on to the next question?
Thank you. You kind of frowned a bit.
What is meant by feed the flock of God, which is among you? And we might as well also address what is meant by neither as being lords over God's heritage and being examples to the flock. In reading this, especially when you put in Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd, feeding the flock wasn't about food, but about loving the flock, guiding them, as we've been speaking about earlier.
Right.
Thank you.
Jesus' response to the devil when he was tempted is, man shall not live by bread alone, but by the word. And that's what this feed. And feed the flock of God, which is among you. Well, they're in your own community. And they need feeding. So it's not like you have to travel a long distance to feed the Word of God to those who are ready and in need.
Yeah, ask yourself, who has God brought into my life? Pay attention to that. I know Fairley once said how she really wanted to share this truth, and she was praying with it a lot, and it seems like everywhere she went, she was telling people about science, and it was done very naturally, not in a preachy way. But when it's in your heart, God will bring those to you who need this, those among you. And then, of course, we pray, that the worldwide outreach, so God is also bringing people from everywhere to our doorstep through our internet.
And that goes the question number 3. How do you do it? Well, you don't preach so much as be an example. And if you're like an example of holiness, people will be the right people. The flock of God will be attracted to you.
I think also with the mental attitude of who can I bless today, or I go out to bless. With that thinking, it's amazing the situations that come up where you can share some of the truth, God's truth, not human opinion. So.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good, very good.
Who can I bless?
Yeah.
And remember, Jesus spoke to his disciples at the very end. Peter, what did he ask?
Feed my sheep.
Thank you.
3 times.
Top on the list. And that's what I pray we should all be praying at these times together, the round tables, Bible studies, God's sheep be fed. And this is very important to remember, who are our pastors, this church?
Bible and Science and Health.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
That's a great relief. I'm so glad that Mrs. Eddy said that. That's it.
Well, and why did she say that? Why did she do that?
No personal
sense
in that.
To get
That's what she does.
Opinion out of it. Thank you.
It's so much better than a minister preaching his own sermon.
Right.
Yeah, and making people, think that what his interpretation or whatever is the truth. I mean, we have to feed the sheep, but with the right food. And I think that's why I love what Mrs. Eddy talks about in the 3 daily duties, so that we cannot mislead anyone with what we say or influence erroneously, really.
Yes. And that's why for each one of us to know what's in the Bible and Science and Health and Prose Works is of utmost importance, to make sure you're not led astray. Even here, I mean, you can never be too alert. You've got to try the spirits in accord with what Mrs. Eddy said and what the Bible says, what God says.
Well, and, this is a really important point that he says mind is its own interpreter. And every individual's relationship with that divine mind, the most important relationship they have. And it needs to be cultivated and not overruled, if you will, by an organization that tells you you can't think for yourself. You need somebody else to interpret something for you.
One thing here as a practitioner, we were very much taught you to never, ever give opinions or tell someone advice or anything like that. Sometimes people think that that's what we're doing. It never should be that. It's always turning you to God. And what might be right for me in a certain circumstance would not be right for you. Therefore, it would be very wrong of me to tell you what to do. And that must be faithfully.
Talking about the impersonal pastor, coming from a background of other denominations, I saw that people would get upset with their minister, what they called, or pastor, or they would start to really worship him instead of the message. And
I often wondered about that. But with its Christian Science, which is so pure, that cannot happen.
Thank you very much.
No.
And you're never without it. It's always there. And this is, the main thrust of our website, why Florence has recorded Science and Health. And Prose Works is also being recorded. Get it out there. Get it out there for people to take in. It'll do the work itself. And a lot of what this church is doing is to cleanse and purify all of these misconceptions that rose up after the passing of Miss Betty.
So let's move on to the last question. Who is the chief shepherd, and when shall he appear? Now, when you read through this, the chief shepherd was Jesus Christ. When I first read it, instinct was there's more chief shepherds out there. I know in other denominations, they saw, as like in the Catholic religion, the chief shepherd would be the Pope. Christian Science, some saw Mary Baker Eddy as the chief shepherd, except that she always says, take it back to Christ, take it back to God. So who is the chief shepherd referenced here in Peter?
God, I think God.
Yeah, it has to be the Christ, doesn't it?
The truth.
That he said, follow me only insofar as what?
Follow Christ.
God.
Yeah. And when Jesus referred to himself as the shepherd, whenever Jesus referred to himself, I find this really, really helpful. He always referred to the Christ.
That's right.
Referred to the human person. I found that so helpful whenever I read in the New Testament, whenever I read anything that Jesus does or says about himself, he's always referring to the Christ.
Yeah.
And then it becomes so clear.
I think it also demonstrated his complete humility to the Christ's presence as the Christ doing everything he was doing. And that's why he could do such, that goes without saying, his incredible work, is that humility that he had. My Father always, and even to say, I can of my own self do nothing. So.
Thank you.
Yes, it was very clear it wasn't the man doing anything.
No. And the Christ, as Mrs. Eddy has said in the glossary, the Christ, the divine manifestation of God, comes to the flesh to destroy incarnate error. So, Christ, always guiding, protecting, comforting, tending tenderly to us. So, the chief shepherd.
And never to a time was before man Jesus appeared, and it's after the Christ, yes, present. Appear. When does it appear?
Then it's appeared. It's already here. When we need, we can call on him. So it's not at one time for him to come. It's already here.
That's it. And he comes, the truth comes when there is the need for it. Comes when you need it, when you're yearning for it. To get back to the beginning of the Bible study, the yearning of it. When you yearn for it and you desire it with your whole heart, mind, and soul, it comes to you. And it's my understanding that many people in prisons and in areas, war-torn areas and other places, this Christ is coming to them, sometimes as a dream, sometimes as a vision, just as it did in days of yore. But it's coming. in their desperation. Usually when we're desperate, that we really cry out for it, and it appears. That's the appearing. But, to go back to what Shukrat was saying, this idea, well, it's some person or something, or it's going to come, it's going to come out from the sky or something. He's going to come back. That's not truth's appearing. It's already coming individually and collectively. Certainly came with Mrs. Eddy in our textbook. That was appearing Christ. Comes in many ways. Just be looking for it and you'll find it. You'll see it expressed in others, as dear Benjamin does everywhere he goes.
It doesn't come, though, when people elect someone else to be that person.
Definitely not. When they wanted a king, when you look to some person for it, at great danger.
And I think it doesn't come also when you're full of pride and all these other things, which I feel the topic clothed with humility is very pertinent to all this. I mean, you can't feel the Christ when you're full of your own opinions. Mrs. Eddy has something very beautiful in Prose Works, page 354. He says that instead of relying on the principle of all that really exists to govern his own creation, self-conceit, ignorance, and pride will regulate God's action. Experience shows that humility is the first step in Christian Science, wherein all is controlled, not by man or law's material, but by wisdom, truth, and love.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
And that certainly ties in with this topic.
This passage reminds me of 1 John 3, where it says, "Behold, what manner of love the Father hath bestowed upon us, that we should be called the sons of God. Therefore the world knoweth us not, because it knew him not. Beloved, now are we the sons of God, and it doth not yet appear what we shall be. But we know that when he shall appear, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. And every man that hath this hope in him purifies himself, even as he is pure."
I love that quote that Shukrat and Shahida gave us, that last sentence. These long for the Christ-likeness that is above the present status of religion and beyond the walks of common life, quite on the verge of heaven. And kneel in gratitude. This is what this science has given us. And reading again about the pilgrims coming to America, this is what they longed for, because they weren't finding it in their native England, and they were willing to give up their so-called security there and face tremendous dangers, come here and to start. And what they wanted is exactly what's in our manual, Betty's manual. They wanted the primitive teachings of Christ Jesus. Primitive. She says it, they said it, William Bradford said it. And that is how it started. And in that very beginning, they did get along with the Indians. There was a Thanksgiving, and they did love each other and care for each other. It was only after about 50 years, again, that seems to take a little bit of time, and then the human mind starts entering. But that purity, that's what we long for. That's what this church is about. Free from that ecclesiastical despotism. And it only comes when one is clothed with humility, because you can't get it any other way. So very deep lessons in this Bible study. I thank both of you, Shukrat and Shahidat, for doing a beautiful job.
Thanks to Linda for finding the quote. It was very helpful.
Oh, thank you, yes. Whole structure of it was very good.
Yes, it was a beautiful structure, and I'm very grateful for the questions that they had, and that gave us a deeper understanding. For me, it just made me appreciate Plainfield more. I thought it was perfect timing, and one of the thoughts that really helped me was the question about what is a shepherd, and it made me think deeper again. And one of the things that it led me to was that the sheep don't follow the shepherd because of his voice. They trust his voice because of how he treats them. And that's how, and I realized that's what and it goes all the way back to then knowing what God wants for us. And the purest way is through the Bible and science and health, so that we know when we're being led, we're hearing the right voice. And so I'm very grateful for this Bible study.
Yes.
Yeah. I am too, which means that so patiently we walk at God's pace, following where the shepherd leads us.
Thank you. And I thought, too, that, Mrs. Eddy's beautiful hymn, Shepherd, Show Me How to Go. Such a beautiful one to keep with us. She understood this principle.
That's why it's everybody's favorite hymn. Or at least several.
Because it's nice to know where to go. I struggle so much with making decisions that I don't, it's nice to know that there is a shepherd that can guide.
Certainly is.
And this is a beautiful Bible study, and this divine love that is our shepherd. What I've seen is it does two things. It guides us in the right way and holds us back from the wrong. It says in the 23rd Psalm, Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. The rod is like that guardrail that keeps you from your own undoing. And if you're in the right frame of mind, you would let it comfort you. So good and complete is God's guidance and protection. Thank you very much.
I think also to George's point about going out and coming in, how comforting is that whichever way there is a shepherd guiding, and he is the one that does not slumber in the same Psalm 121 also. He doesn't slumber, so always we can be sure of his guidance and protection and provision.
Yes, it's come to me, this statement by Mrs. Eddy. More than this we cannot ask. Higher we cannot look. And farther we cannot go. He guides us every step of the way. How wonderful is that?
If I could, I'd love to share just a tiny bit of this book, really, since we have a couple minutes from the Hawthorne Hall, because I love what he says about Mrs. Eddy. And his purpose of writing this book was to know our history, just like we need to know about the Puritans and their purpose and Washington and some of the early founders and the principles that they based this country on. And then we need to understand Mrs. Eddy's life. This is all the stuff he said in his beginning. But he writes, first he writes that the persecution that the people had to go through and how heated it was to be obedient to Mrs. Eddy and stand with her. And they had such adverse conditions. But he writes, no religious effort recorded in history has been subjected to such a test as has Christian Science, especially during its critical period of growth in the years of 1884 85, and 86 for the proof of its value. As demanded by the medical schools and clergy, was it to be its power to heal the sick upon this result, and according their judgment it must stand or fall. But he goes on that these early years of struggle and growth, when studied intimately, reveal a supreme faith, moral courage, kindness, love, calmness, and hope in times of persecution, seldom, if ever, equaled by any religion under similar conditions. And he has such a deep respect and care for Mrs. Eddy, and he really wants people to understand. And in this book, this was his purpose, to show that how Mrs. Eddy walked among her flock, healed, taught, guided, lovingly encouraged, and achieved. And that was how he ended his preface. And it's just such a beautiful purpose, I think. And so we'll have to get more of this out to share to people so you can understand what she went through to keep it pure and how to recognize the wolves in sheep clothing.
Thank you so much. I look forward to reading it. It's beautiful. We need the purity of the origins of things, because what happens, so much gets twisted and turned and the history gets rewritten. You must go back and understand this golden thread that has gone through all of history. And that's the truth for all of us, because the era would try to counterfeit it and tell us other lies. So thank you.
I just wanted to quickly add, in support of the order of who the great shepherd is that was outlined in this discussion, and what Linda just said about the support from an early worker in Bliss Knapp's Destiny of the Mother Church, on page 249, he outlines from Daniel exactly that order that we had spoken of and everybody had illuminated here. And it would be, I think, a good place for people to look and to see what he has to say. And he was an incredible love for Mrs. Eddy, and just very highly recommended.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shahida. Thank you, Shukra.
Shahidat. Yes. Thank you.
Wonderful as always. Thank you very much.
Thank you.